The war ended the day the rains began, and Adrian Merrick walked home through mud that swallowed his boots to the ankle with every step. He had left his farm 4 years earlier when the conscription officers came through the valley, and he returned to find his fields overgrown, his barn listing to one side, and his grain mill missing half its roof. The water wheel still stood, locked in place by debris and neglect, but the mechanism inside had rusted beyond easy repair. Adrian set down his pack in what remained of the mill's main room and began to assess the damage by the gray light filtering through the broken roof. That was when he heard breathing that was not his own. He turned slowly, one hand moving to the knife at his belt out of habit, and saw them huddled in the corner behind the old grinding stones. An orc woman sat with her back against the wall, her arms wrapped around 2 children who pressed against her sides. The children could not have been more than 6 and 8 years old. All 3 had the green skin and small tusks characteristic of their kind, and all 3 watched him with identical expressions of exhausted wariness. Adrian's hand fell away from the knife. He looked at them for a long moment, taking in their torn clothing, the hollowness in their cheeks, the way the woman positioned herself between him and the children even though she was clearly too weak to fight. "The roof leaks," he said finally. "Worst over there by the south wall. This corner stays mostly dry." He picked up his pack and walked to the opposite side of the room, as far from them as the space allowed. He unpacked his bedroll, spread it on the floor, and lay down with his back to them. Within minutes, exhaustion dragged him into sleep. When he woke at dawn, they were still there. The woman was awake, watching him with dark eyes that held no trust but no immediate hostility either. The children slept on, their small bodies curled against their mother's warmth. Adrian sat up slowly. "I am going to make a fire," he said. "To cook breakfast." He moved carefully, keeping his gestures visible and unhurried. The woman did not speak, but she did not gather her children to flee either. Adrian built a small fire in the old hearth, using wood he found stacked against the outer wall, probably left by travelers or refugees who had sheltered here before. He had dried meat in his pack, and a few potatoes he had traded for 2 days earlier. He put the potatoes in the coals and set strips of meat on a flat stone to warm. When the food was ready, he divided it into 4 portions. He ate his share where he sat and left the other 3 portions on a wooden plank near the fire, then went outside to inspect the water wheel. The morning was cold and damp. Mist hung over the valley, turning the overgrown fields into gray-green shadows. Adrian walked the perimeter of the mill, noting each piece of damage, each repair that would need to be made. The list was long. He had saved most of his soldiers' pay, but money alone would not rebuild what the war had broken. That would take time and work, and he had no shortage of either. When he came back inside, the food was gone. The woman sat in the same position, but the children were awake now, their eyes following his every movement. He nodded to them and began sorting through the tools and supplies he had brought, making plans. Over the next 3 days, Adrian worked on patching the roof. He scavenged lumber from a collapsed shed on the property and used canvas from his military kit to cover the worst gaps. The woman and her children stayed in their corner, venturing out only when he was clearly occupied elsewhere. He cooked twice a day and left portions for them. They always ate, but they never spoke. On the 4th morning, he woke to find the woman standing near his bedroll. She held a bucket of water from the stream, freshly drawn. She set it down carefully and stepped back. "Thank you," Adrian said. She nodded once and returned to her children. It was a beginning. The days developed a rhythm. Adrian worked on the mill from dawn until the light failed. He replaced rotten boards, cleared debris from the water wheel, and began the slow process of cleaning and oiling the grinding mechanism. The woman started moving around the mill more freely, and he sometimes caught her watching him work with an expression he could not quite read. 2 weeks after his return, he came inside at midday to find her crouched by the hearth. She had rebuilt his morning fire and was using it to heat water in a dented pot he had not known was there. The children sat nearby, cleaner than they had been, their hair still damp. "I can hunt," she said. Her voice was low and careful, each word shaped with deliberate precision. "There are rabbits in the high grass if you have cord for snares." Adrian considered this. "I have cord," he said, "but the fields are mine to manage. You do not owe me work for shelter." "We eat your food," she said flatly. "I do not take charity." He heard the pride in that and the brittleness beneath it. "Then we share the work," he said, "and we share the food. Fair trade." She searched his face for a long moment, then nodded. Her name was Greta Dernhello, and her children were a boy named Korik and a girl named Ivara. She told him this the next day, as she showed him the 3 rabbits she had snared. He told her his name in return, and taught her how to skin and clean the game using the techniques he had learned as a boy. She had her own methods, orc ways of preparing meat, but she watched his technique with interest and showed him hers in turn. Korik and Ivara began to venture closer. They were curious children, despite their wariness. Adrian let them watch him work, and sometimes gave them small tasks, holding a board steady while he nailed it, fetching tools from his kit, collecting acorns from beneath the old oak that grew beside the mill. Ivara was the bolder of the two, asking questions in a quiet voice about the water wheel and how it worked. Korik said less, but had a gift for noticing when Adrian needed a specific tool and bringing it before being asked. Greta watched these interactions with fierce attention, ready to intervene if Adrian showed even a hint of impatience or cruelty. He knew he was being tested. He did not mind. If he had children who had lived through a war, he would watch anyone who came near them with the same ferocious care. The first hard frost came in late autumn, and Adrian realized they could not spend the winter in the mill with half the building still open to the elements. He made a decision. He had timber. He had nails. He had 2 strong hands, and the knowledge his father had beaten into him about construction and carpentry. He sectioned off the eastern third of the mill's ground floor and built an interior wall with a proper door and a window that could be shuttered. He reinforced the roof above it until it was watertight, installed a small iron stove he bought from a peddler passing through the valley, and built sleeping platforms along 2 walls. It was not a large space, but it was warm and dry and secure. When it was finished, he moved his own bedroll into the new room and built a second platform for Greta and the children. "This is for all of us?" Greta asked, standing in the doorway. "Winter is coming," Adrian said. "We will need to keep the heat in." She looked at the 2 sleeping platforms, clearly separate, clearly defined. She looked at the sturdy door and the good stove and the thick walls. Then she looked at him. "You are not what I expected," she said quietly. "What did you expect? Someone who would use us or cast us out?" She paused. "Not someone who would build walls to keep us warm." Adrian shrugged, uncomfortable with the weight of her gratitude. "I need help getting this mill working again. You need a place to stay. It makes sense." It was not the whole truth, but he was not ready to examine what the whole truth might be. They moved into the room that night. Ivara chattered with excitement about having a real bed again, even if it was just a platform with blankets. Korik ran his hands over the smooth wood of the wall, his small face serious with wonder. Greta said nothing, but when Adrian glanced at her, he saw her eyes were bright. Winter closed around the valley like a fist. Snow fell in thick curtains, covering the fields and the broken parts of the mill in white. Adrian worked inside, repairing the grinding stones and the mechanical parts of the mill's works. Greta helped when he needed a second pair of hands, and when she did not, she mended their clothing or prepared food or taught her children their letters by scratching symbols in the dirt floor with a stick. Adrian watched her teach and realized she was educated in a way he had not expected. She knew her letters and numbers. She knew the stories of her people and could recite long passages from memory. When he asked, she told him she had been the daughter of a clan leader's advisor, raised with books and learning before the war had scattered her people and taken everything she had known. "Your husband?" Adrian asked once and immediately wished he had not. Her face went still. "Dead," she said. "In the war, fighting for a cause that did not care whether he lived or died." He did not ask again, but he noticed things. The way she flinched when voices were raised, even in laughter. The way she positioned herself between the children and the door at night. The way she watched the road whenever a traveler passed, her whole body tense until they were gone. She had been hurt, and not just by the war. Adrian had no pretty words to offer her. He had never been good with words. But he could be steady. He could be predictable. He could make sure that when she woke in the morning, the fire was already lit and the water was already heating and the world was the same as it had been the day before. It was a small thing, but it was what he had. Midwinter came, and with it a brief thaw. Adrian took the opportunity to walk to the village 3 miles down the valley to trade for supplies. He returned with flour, salt, sugar, needles and thread, and a small bag of hard candies that he gave to Korik and Ivara without ceremony. Their faces lit up with delight, and the sweetness of their joy did something strange to his chest. Greta saw him watching them and smiled, a real smile that softened her whole face. It was the first time he had seen her smile like that, and he felt the ground shift beneath him. He was in trouble. He had not meant to care for them. He had not meant to wake each morning thinking first of whether Ivara's cough had eased or whether Korik needed new boots. He had not meant to find himself watching Greta as she moved through the small space of their shared room, noticing the way the firelight caught in her dark hair, the strength in her hands, the set of her shoulders when she was tired but would not admit it. He had not meant to fall. But he was a farmer, and farmers knew about things that grew whether you planned them or not. Spring came slowly, reluctantly, the snow retreating inch by inch to reveal the sodden fields beneath. As soon as the ground thawed enough to work, Adrian went out to assess his land. 4 years of neglect had left the fields wild, but the soil was still good. He could reclaim it. He could plant. Greta came with him, leaving the children at the mill with strict instructions to stay inside. She walked the boundaries of his property in silence, her eyes scanning the overgrown rows and the broken fences. "This is good land," she said finally. "It was," Adrian said. "It will be again. You will need help, plowing, planting, too much for one man. I will manage." She gave him a skeptical look. "You are stubborn, so I have been told." She laughed, a short huff of sound that surprised them both. Then her expression grew serious. "Let me help," she said. "I know farming. My clan grew grain and vegetables before the war. I can work." Adrian wanted to say no, wanted to tell her she had done enough, that she should rest, that he could handle it alone. But the truth was that he could not if he wanted the mill running and the fields productive before the next winter. And the truth beneath that was that he wanted her beside him. Wanted her strength and her knowledge and her presence. "All right," he said. "We work together." They started the next day. Adrian had managed to trade for a plow blade, and he fitted it to a frame he built from salvaged wood. Without a draft animal, they pulled it themselves, Adrian in the harness and Greta walking behind to guide the blade. It was brutal work, the kind that left them both exhausted and aching at day's end. But the fields began to take shape, row by row. Korik and Ivara helped where they could, clearing stones and spreading the seed that Adrian had bought with the last of his savings. They worked together through the lengthening days of spring, and the farm began to look like a farm again. One evening, as they sat around the fire after supper, Ivara climbed into Adrian's lap without asking permission. She was half asleep, her small body warm and trusting against his chest. Adrian froze, uncertain, but Greta nodded to him, and he carefully wrapped an arm around the child to keep her from falling. She sighed and burrowed closer, and something in Adrian's heart cracked open. Korik followed his sister's lead the next night, leaning against Adrian's side as the firelight danced. And the night after that, it was simply expected that the children would settle near him in the evening, seeking his warmth and his solidity. He had become their anchor without noticing the moment it happened. Greta watched this with unreadable eyes, but she did not object. If anything, she seemed to relax some small degree, as if a fear she had carried was easing its grip. The crops sprouted, green and promising. The water wheel turned again, its mechanisms repaired and oiled. Adrian tested the grinding stones and found them true. He spread word through the valley that the mill would be open for business by summer, and farmers began to stop by to inspect his work and negotiate terms. Some of them saw Greta and the children and said nothing. Some of them made comments, carefully neutral observations about the unusual composition of his household. One man, a sour-faced landowner named Fletcher, was less subtle. "You have got orcs living here," Fletcher said, his lip curling. "I do," Adrian said evenly. "People will talk. People always talk." Fletcher leaned closer, his voice dropping. "It is not right, Merrick, not natural. You want to do business in this valley, you should think about the company you keep." Adrian set down the board he was holding and turned to face Fletcher fully. He was not a large man, but he had 4 years of war in his eyes, and Fletcher saw it. The landowner took a step back. "The company I keep is none of your concern," Adrian said quietly. "If you want to use my mill, you will be respectful under my roof. If you cannot manage that, you can take your grain elsewhere." Fletcher left without another word. Greta had been standing in the doorway, out of sight but within earshot. When Adrian turned, she was watching him with something fierce and grateful in her expression. "You did not have to do that," she said. "Yes," Adrian said. "I did." She crossed the space between them, and for a moment he thought she might touch him. But she stopped just short, her hands clenching and unclenching at her sides. "Why?" she asked, and it was not anger in her voice but confusion, as if she genuinely could not understand. "Why defend us? Why let us stay? We are nothing to you." "You are not nothing," Adrian said, and the words came out rougher than he intended. "You are not nothing to me." The air between them went taut and still. Greta's eyes widened, and Adrian realized what he had just revealed. He waited for her to pull away, to retreat into the careful distance she had maintained all these months. Instead, she whispered, "Adrian." Just his name, but the way she said it made his chest ache. He reached out slowly, giving her every chance to move away, and touched her hand. Her skin was warm. She did not pull back. They stood there, hands barely touching, the enormity of the moment pressing down on them both. Then Korik called from inside, asking about supper, and the spell broke. Greta stepped back, her cheeks darker, and hurried inside. Adrian followed more slowly, his heart pounding like he had run a mile. Something had shifted. The ground beneath them was new. The days that followed were strange and careful. They worked side by side as they always had, but now every accidental touch felt significant. Every shared glance lasted a heartbeat too long. Adrian caught himself watching her constantly, cataloging the small details of her existence, the way she tucked her hair behind her pointed ears when she was concentrating, the rasp in her voice when she was tired, the tenderness in her hands when she touched her children. He was no longer falling. He had already landed, but Greta remained guarded, and Adrian understood why. She had children to protect. She had already lost one husband. Trusting another man with her heart, with her family, was a risk she might not be willing to take. So Adrian did the only thing he knew how to do. He stayed. He worked. He proved day by day that he was not going anywhere. Summer arrived in a blaze of heat and green. The fields grew thick with grain. The mill's water wheel turned steadily, and farmers began bringing their harvest to be ground. Adrian worked long hours, and Greta worked beside him, managing the customers and keeping the accounts with a precision that impressed him. The children played in the stream and helped with small tasks and grew visibly stronger, their hollowed cheeks filling out, their laughter coming more easily. They were thriving, all of them. One evening in late summer, as the sun set in shades of orange and gold, Adrian found Greta standing by the water wheel. She was watching it turn, her expression distant. "Penny for your thoughts," he said, coming to stand beside her. She glanced at him, then back at the wheel. "I was thinking that I have not felt safe in a very long time," she said quietly. "Not since before the war, maybe not even then." Adrian said nothing, letting her speak. "My first husband," she said, and Adrian's hands clenched at his sides. "He was not a kind man. My father arranged the marriage for political reasons. I thought I could make it work. I thought if I was good enough, obedient enough, he would soften." She laughed bitterly. "He did not. And when the war came, I was almost relieved. I thought it might give me a way out." "Did it?" Adrian asked, his voice rough. "He died in the first year," Greta said, "and I was free, but I was also alone with 2 children and no clan to protect us. We ran. We hid. We survived." She turned to look at him fully. "And then we found you." "I am glad you did," Adrian said. "I did not think men like you existed," she said. "Men who are gentle without being weak, who are strong without being cruel." Adrian's throat felt tight. "I am nothing special, Greta." "You are to us," she said, and the simplicity of it undid him. He reached for her, and this time she came to him without hesitation. He wrapped his arms around her carefully, as if she were something precious and breakable, and she pressed her face against his chest. They stood there as the sun sank below the horizon and the stars began to emerge, holding each other in the gathering dark. When they finally pulled apart, Greta looked up at him with eyes that held no more walls. "I am afraid," she whispered. "Of me, of losing this, of losing you." Adrian cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing over her cheekbones. "You will not lose me," he said. "I am not going anywhere." She searched his eyes, looking for the lie, for the crack that would let doubt in. She did not find one. "I think I love you," she said, the words halting and uncertain, as if she was speaking a language she had almost forgotten. "I know I love you," Adrian said, and kissed her. It was a gentle kiss, tentative and sweet. Greta made a small sound against his mouth and kissed him back, her hands fisting in his shirt. When they broke apart, they were both breathing hard, and Adrian felt like the world had rearranged itself into something new and terrifying and wonderful. "We should go slowly," Greta said, though she had not let go of his shirt. "As slowly as you need," Adrian agreed. They stood there a moment longer, then walked back to the mill hand in hand. The children noticed the change immediately, with the uncanny perception of the young. Ivara grinned and whispered something to Korik, who smiled shyly. At supper they sat closer together, the 4 of them, a unit, a family. Adrian let himself think the word and found that it fit, but peace, he had learned in the war, was always fragile. The stranger arrived on a morning in early autumn when the air had just begun to carry the first hint of cold. Adrian was outside, splitting wood, when he saw the figure approaching up the road. He was an orc, tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in travel-worn clothing. He carried no visible weapons, but he moved with the easy confidence of someone who did not need them. Adrian set down his axe and waited. The stranger stopped a respectful distance away. "I am looking for Greta Dernhallow," he said. His voice was deep and accented, his words careful. "Who is asking?" Adrian said. "My name is Thorgrim. I was clan brother to her late husband." Something cold settled in Adrian's gut. "Wait here," he said. He found Greta inside, kneading dough for bread. The moment she saw his face, her hands stilled. "What is wrong?" "There is someone here to see you," Adrian said. "Says his name is Thorgrim, says he was clan brother to your husband." All the color drained from Greta's face. "No," she whispered. "You know him." "Yes," her voice shook. "He will have come for the children." Adrian's blood went cold. "What?" "Orc custom," Greta said, her words tumbling over each other. "If a man dies and his widow cannot provide for his children, they go to his clan brother. It is the law of our people. Thorgrim has every right, he has no right," Adrian said, his voice hard. "Those children are yours." "Not if he invokes the old laws." Greta's eyes were wide and desperate. "Adrian, he can take them. Legally, I cannot stop him." Adrian looked at her, at the fear and grief written across her face, and made a decision. "Come with me," he said. They went outside together. Thorgrim saw Greta and inclined his head in a gesture of respect. "Greta," he said, "it is good to see you alive. We feared the worst." "Thorgrim," Greta said, her voice barely steady, "what brings you here, I think you know." His eyes moved to the mill, to the signs of habitation, and then to Adrian. "I have been searching for you since the war ended. When I heard that you and the children had been seen in this valley, I came as quickly as I could." "We are well," Greta said. "We are safe. You do not need to worry." "I can see that you have found shelter," Thorgrim said, and there was something careful in his tone. "But the children belong with their blood, with their people. I have come to take them home, Greta, to raise them as my brother would have wanted." "No," Greta said, and her voice broke on the word. "Please, Thorgrim, they are all I have." Thorgrim's expression softened, but he did not waver. "I know this is hard, but it is our way, you know this." Adrian stepped forward. She said no. Thorgrim's gaze sharpened. "This does not concern you, human." "It does," Adrian said. "This is my land. That is my family. It concerns me." "Your family?" Thorgrim's eyebrows rose. "You have married her." Adrian hesitated for a fraction of a second, and Thorgrim saw it. "You have not," Thorgrim said. "Then you have no claim. The children come with me." "They are not going anywhere," Adrian said, and there was steel in his voice. Thorgrim studied him for a long moment. "You care for them," he said finally. "I can see that. But care is not kinship. I am blood. I can give them a place among our people, a future. What can you give them?" "A life as outcasts. The shame of being raised by a human while their mother lives in sin with a man not her husband." "I can give them love," Adrian said. "I can give them safety. I can give them a home." "Love does not erase what they are," Thorgrim said. "They are orc children. They need to know their heritage, their clan, their place in the world. Can you give them that?" Adrian opened his mouth and closed it again. He could not argue with that. He did not know orc ways. He could not teach them their own history, their own culture. Greta made a small, broken sound. Thorgrim turned to her. "Come with them," he said gently. "Come back to the clan. We will care for all of you. You do not have to do this alone." "I am not alone," Greta said, her voice shaking but firm. "I have Adrian." "A human farmer," Thorgrim said. "What kind of life is that?" "A good one," Greta said, and there was fire in her eyes now. "A better one than I ever had with your brother." Thorgrim went very still. "What do you mean?" Your brother was not a kind man, Thorgrim, Greta said quietly. He was cruel. He was violent. I do not speak ill of the dead lightly, but you asked me to return to a clan that gave me to him and did nothing when he hurt me. Why would I go back to that? Thorgrim's face twisted with something that might have been shame. I did not know, he said. You did not ask, Greta said. No one did. Silence fell, heavy and painful. Thorgrim looked at Greta, then at Adrian, then at the mill behind them. Show me the children, he said finally. Let me see them. Greta hesitated, then nodded. She led him inside, Adrian following close behind. Korik and Ivara were in the main room playing a game with stones. They looked up as the adults entered, and their eyes went wide at the sight of Thorgrim. Thorgrim crouched down to their level, his movements slow and careful. "Hello, little ones," he said. "I am Thorgrim. I knew your father." Korik and Ivara exchanged glances, then looked at their mother. Greta nodded, and they turned back to Thorgrim. "Our father is dead," Ivara said, her voice small. "I know," Thorgrim said gently. "I am sorry. He was a brave warrior." "Adrian is brave too," Korik said suddenly. "He takes care of us." Thorgrim's eyes flicked to Adrian, then back to the children. "Does he? He built us beds," Ivara said. "And he teaches us things. And he tells us stories." "He makes Mother smile," Korik added. Thorgrim was quiet for a long moment. Then he stood and faced Greta. "They are happy here," he said. "Yes," Greta said. "They are safe." "Yes." Thorgrim looked at Adrian. "You love them." "Yes," Adrian said. "And my clan brother, you know what he was." "I know what Greta has told me," Adrian said carefully. "And I know what she is not. I do not need to know more than that." Thorgrim nodded slowly. He looked around the room at the neat space, the well-stocked shelves, the warm stove. He looked at the children, healthy and bright-eyed. He looked at Greta, standing close to Adrian, her hand in his. "I came here to fulfill a duty," Thorgrim said. "To take my brother's children and raise them in his memory, but I see now that would be a disservice to them." He met Greta's eyes. "You have found something good here, something real. I will not take that from you." Greta's breath caught. "You are releasing your claim." "I am," Thorgrim said, "but I ask one thing in return." "What?" Greta asked warily. "Let me visit," Thorgrim said. "Let me be part of their lives. Let me teach them the ways of our people so they do not forget where they come from." Greta looked at Adrian. He nodded. "Yes," Greta said. "You may visit." Thorgrim smiled, and it was a genuine smile, warm and relieved. "Thank you." He turned to Adrian and extended his hand. "Take care of them, human. They are precious." Adrian shook his hand. "I will." Thorgrim crouched down once more to say goodbye to the children, ruffling their hair and making them promise to be good. Then he stood, nodded to Greta and Adrian, and walked out into the autumn sunlight. They watched him go, standing together in the doorway. When he was out of sight, Greta sagged against Adrian and he wrapped his arms around her. "They are safe," she whispered. "They are really safe." "They are ours," Adrian said. Greta pulled back to look at him. "Ours, if you will have me," Adrian said. "I want to marry you, Greta. I want to make this real. I want to be their father and your husband and build a life with all of you." Tears spilled down Greta's cheeks, but she was smiling. "Yes," she said. "Yes, Adrian, yes." He kissed her there in the doorway, with the children cheering behind them and the autumn wind blowing through the valley. They were married 3 weeks later in a small ceremony at the village church. The priest was dubious, and some of the villagers stayed away, but enough came to fill the pews. Thorgrim returned, as he had promised, and stood as witness. Korik and Ivara stood beside their mother, solemn and proud in their best clothes. Adrian spoke his vows in a steady voice, promising to love and protect and honor Greta for all his days. Greta spoke hers with tears in her eyes and her hand clasped tight in his. When the priest pronounced them married, Adrian kissed his wife, and the small crowd cheered. The celebration afterward was simple. They gathered at the mill, now fully repaired and operational, and shared food and drink. The water wheel turned steadily, its sound a constant gentle music. Neighbors who had been skeptical saw the way Adrian looked at Greta, the way she smiled at him, the way the children clung to them both, and their doubts softened. As the sun set, Adrian found himself standing by the water wheel with Greta at his side, watching their children play with some of the village kids who had come. "I never thought I would have this," Greta said quietly. "A home, a family, a husband who is good to me." "You deserve it," Adrian said. "You deserve everything." She leaned her head against his shoulder. "We should have more children," she said, and he could hear the smile in her voice. "This mill needs a lot of workers." Adrian laughed, a sound of pure joy. "How many are you thinking?" "As many as you can handle, farmer." "I can handle quite a few," he said, and kissed her temple. Winter came again, but this time it was different. The small room they had all shared was now properly divided, with a separate space for the children and a private room for Adrian and Greta. The mill ran smoothly and money came in steadily. They had enough to not just survive, but to live. On the coldest nights, they gathered around the stove, Adrian and Greta and Korik and Ivara, telling stories and playing games. Sometimes Thorgrim visited, as he had promised, and taught the children songs in the orc language and told them stories of their heritage. Adrian welcomed him, and the two men developed a wary but genuine respect for each other. Spring came, and with it the promise of new life. Greta told Adrian one morning with a shy smile that she was carrying his child. He picked her up and spun her around, laughing, and she clung to him and laughed with him. The baby was born in late autumn, a healthy boy with his mother's green skin and his father's eyes. They named him Paxson, and Korik and Ivara doted on their new brother with a tenderness that made Adrian's heart ache. Years passed. The mill thrived. The farm produced good harvests. Korik grew tall and strong, learning the miller's trade from Adrian and the ways of his people from Thorgrim. Ivara proved to have a gift for numbers, and managed the mill's accounts with the same precision her mother once had. Paxson toddled after his older siblings, adored and protected. More children came. A daughter they named Zara, with Greta's sharp mind and Adrian's quiet determination. Each new addition to the family was a joy, a blessing, a confirmation that the life they had built was real and solid. The villagers grew accustomed to the Merrick family. Some never fully accepted the presence of orcs in their midst, but most came to respect the hard-working family at the mill. Adrian and Greta proved, year after year, that love could cross any divide. On the 10th anniversary of the day, Adrian had first found Greta and her children sheltering in his broken mill. He stood once again by the water wheel. The mill was no longer broken. It was strong and prosperous, the heart of the valley's grain trade. The fields were lush and productive. The family was large and loud and full of life. Greta came to stand beside him, as she so often did. She was older now, her face marked by laughter lines and the trials of bearing and raising children. She was more beautiful to him than the day he had married her. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked, and he knew what she meant. Did he regret taking them in, tying his life to hers, choosing the harder path? He thought about the question seriously, as he always did when she asked it. Then he shook his head. "Never," he said. "Not for a single moment." She smiled and took his hand. Behind them, they could hear the children playing, their voices bright with joy. The water wheel turned, steady and sure. The sun was warm on their faces. Adrian had come home from war to a broken place and a broken life. But he had found something worth rebuilding. He had found Greta and she had found him, and together they had made something beautiful out of the ruins. He looked at his wife, at the mill, at the life they had built together. He was home. The mill celebrated its grand reopening on a crisp autumn morning 15 years after Adrian first returned from war. The structure had been expanded twice now. A second grinding room added to handle the increased demand from farmers across 3 valleys. Adrian had just turned 40, his hair showing threads of silver at the temples, and Greta stood beside him at 36, still strong and capable, directing the final preparations with the ease of long practice. The celebration was her idea. Adrian would have been content to simply continue working, but Greta insisted that the community needed this a chance to gather, to celebrate prosperity after so many years of hardship, to see what could be built when people chose cooperation over conflict. Tables had been set up in the yard, laden with food that neighbors had contributed. The water wheel, now fitted with new bearings that Adrian had designed himself, turned with barely a whisper of sound. Korik, now 21 and nearly as tall as Adrian, managed the demonstration grinding for curious onlookers. Ivara, 19 and engaged to the blacksmith's son, kept the younger children organized and out from underfoot. Paxson, at 14, was responsible for giving tours of the mill's interior to anyone interested. He had inherited his father's patience and his mother's gift for explanation, and a small crowd followed him eagerly. 10-year-old Zara helped serve refreshments, her cheerful efficiency a mirror of her mother at that age. Adrian watched his family move through the crowd, each of them confident and valued, and felt something settle deep in his chest. This was what he had fought for in the war without knowing it. This was the peace worth having. Thorgrim arrived mid-morning, his hair now fully gray but his step still strong. He had become a fixture in their lives, visiting 4 or 5 times a year, always bringing gifts for the children and stories from the wider orc clans. His presence had done much to ease the acceptance of Adrian's family in the community. It was hard to maintain prejudice against orcs when one of them showed up regularly to help with harvests and repair work, asking nothing in return but the chance to know his clan brother's children. "Adrian," Thorgrim called, clasping his arm in the orc fashion. "Greta, you have built something remarkable here." "We had help," Greta said, smiling. "You included." "The children grow well," Thorgrim observed, watching Korik heft a sack of grain with easy strength. "Korik is the image of his grandfather. He would be proud." "I hope so," Greta said softly. The village mayor, an older woman named Beatrice Stone who had been skeptical of the Merrick household at first but had gradually become an ally, stepped up to make a speech. She talked about the importance of the mill to the valley's economy, about the reliability and fairness of the Merrick family's dealings, about the value of hard work and integrity. She did not mention that the family was mixed human and orc. She did not need to. Their presence spoke for itself. When the speech ended and the applause died down, Greta squeezed Adrian's hand. "You should say something," she murmured. "I am not good with speeches," Adrian protested. "You are good with truth," Greta said. "That is better." Reluctantly, Adrian stepped forward, the crowd quieted, waiting. He looked out at the gathered faces, neighbors, customers, friends. He saw acceptance on some faces, tolerance on others, and on a few lingering suspicion. He had learned to live with all of it. "I am a farmer," he said simply. "I know about planting and patience. About tending things and watching them grow, about working with what you have and making it better." He paused, gathering his thoughts. 15 years ago I came home to ruins. The war had taken almost everything, but I found something in those ruins that was worth more than anything I had lost. I found family. His eyes found Greta in the crowd. She was watching him with that soft expression that still made his heart race after all these years. "This mill is not just mine," Adrian continued. "It belongs to everyone who helped build it. Everyone who brought grain and trusted us to treat it right. Everyone who gave us a chance when they could have looked away." He met Thorgrim's eyes. Everyone who chose to see people instead of differences. He cleared his throat, uncomfortable with the emotion rising in it. "The water wheel turns because water flows downhill. That is just nature. That is just how things are. But a mill works because people choose to work together. Because we decide that feeding our families and our neighbors matters more than old grudges and old fears." He gestured to his children, scattered through the crowd. "They are the future. All of our children are. And the world we give them depends on the choices we make now. The kindness we show or withhold. The walls we build or tear down." Adrian paused, then finished simply. "Thank you for choosing kindness. Thank you for helping us build this." The applause was genuine and warm. Adrian stepped back quickly, his part done, and Greta was there to slip her hand into his. "Well said, husband," she murmured. "I meant it," he said. "I know." The celebration continued into the afternoon. Children played games in the yard. Adults talked business and weather and politics. The food disappeared at a steady rate. Adrian found himself cornered by a young farmer who wanted advice on water management, and he spent a pleasant hour sketching irrigation plans in the dirt with a stick. When the sun began to sink toward the horizon, people started to drift homeward, calling goodbyes and thanks. The Merrick children began cleaning up, moving with practiced efficiency born of years of chores. Adrian helped stack tables while Greta organized leftovers. By the time full darkness fell, only the family remained. They gathered in the main room of their home, the children sprawled in various states of exhaustion, Paxson already half asleep against Coric's shoulder. "A good day," Greta said, settling beside Adrian on the bench they had built together 5 years earlier. "A very good day," Adrian agreed. Ivara looked up from where she sat braiding Zara's hair. "Father, will you tell the story?" "Which story?" Adrian asked, though he knew. "The beginning story," Ivara said. "How you found Mother and Coric and me. It had become a tradition, this story." The children never tired of hearing how their family had formed. Adrian glanced at Greta, who nodded with a small smile. "It was raining," Adrian began, as he always did. "The war had just ended, and I walked home through mud that tried to steal my boots with every step." The children settled in to listen, even Coric and Ivara, who had heard it 100 times. Adrian told them about the broken mill and the family hiding in the corner, about the first cautious days of sharing space and food, about the slow building of trust. Greta took over the story when it reached the point of her teaching the children their letters, describing how seriously Ivara had approached learning and how Coric had preferred working with his hands. The children laughed at the stories of their younger selves. Together, Adrian and Greta wove the narrative forward: the first winter, the planting of the fields, the repair of the water wheel. They told about Thorgrim's arrival and the fear it had brought, and then the resolution and the relief. "And then Father asked Mother to marry him," Zara said, her voice dreamy. "She loved this part. And she said yes," Paxson added with satisfaction. "And we became a real family," Coric finished. "All of us." "You were always a real family," Adrian corrected gently. "The ceremony just made it official." Ivara yawned hugely. "I like our family," she announced. "So do I," Adrian said, and felt Greta lean against his shoulder. One by one, the children drifted off to bed. Coric carried Paxson to the room the boys shared. Ivara and Zara disappeared into their own space, still whispering and giggling. Finally, it was just Adrian and Greta, sitting in the quiet mill with the sound of the water wheel a steady heartbeat outside. "You think they understand how rare this is?" Greta asked softly. "How lucky we are." They will, Adrian said. When they are older and have seen more of the world, they will understand. Greta was quiet for a moment, then said, I never thanked you properly. For what? For not turning us away that first day, for building walls to keep us warm, for fighting for us. For loving us. Adrian turned to face her fully, cupping her cheek in his palm. You gave me a reason to come home, he said. You gave me everything that matters. If there are thanks owed, they are mine to give. She kissed him then, soft and sweet and full of the comfort of long years together. When they parted, her eyes were bright. Come to bed, husband, she said. Tomorrow the work begins again. Tomorrow, Adrian agreed. They walked together through the quiet mill, checking locks and banking fires, the routine of 15 years flowing like water. In their room, they shed the day's weariness and curled together under quilts that Greta had sewn and Adrian had helped stuff with wool from their own sheep. Outside, the water wheel turned in the darkness, steady and true. Inside, a family slept safe and warm, the trials of war and wandering long behind them. Adrian drifted toward sleep with Greta's breathing soft against his chest and thought, as he often did, of that rain-soaked day when he had come home to ruins and found instead the beginning of everything. He had been a soldier who learned to destroy. He had become a farmer who learned to build. But more than either of those, he had become a husband and a father, and those roles suited him better than any he had ever imagined. The last thought he had before sleep claimed him was simple and true. He was home, and home was exactly where he was meant to be. Morning came with pale light and the sound of roosters crowing. Adrian woke to find Greta already up and moving as she usually was. He dressed and went downstairs to find her at the stove, making breakfast for the small army their family had become. The mayor stopped by already, Greta said as he entered. She wants to discuss expanding the mill again. Apparently there are 3 new farms starting up in the Eastern Valley. Already, Adrian shook his head in amusement. We just finished the last expansion. Success breeds success, Greta said with a smile. We will need to hire help soon. Korik cannot manage both grinding rooms alone. I have been thinking about that, Adrian said, pouring himself tea. There is a young orc man, recently settled in the next valley. He came by yesterday asking about work, good references. Greta raised an eyebrow. You have been busy. I keep my ears open. They discussed business over breakfast, a comfortable back and forth that came from years of partnership. The children filtered in one by one, helping themselves to porridge and bread. Paxson had a black eye from some adventure the day before, and Zara had grass stains on her dress, but they were healthy and happy, and that was what mattered. After breakfast, work claimed them all. Adrian went to check on a bearing that had been making an odd sound. Korik managed the first customers of the day. Ivara worked on the accounts. Greta supervised the younger children's morning lessons, because education remained important to her even in the midst of running a business. It was a normal day, busy and productive and full of small satisfactions. Adrian fixed the bearing, consulted with a farmer about seed varieties, and helped Paxson understand a difficult concept in mathematics. Greta negotiated a good price for a bulk order, disciplined Zara for tracking mud through the house, and made plans for the evening meal. At midday, a messenger arrived from the village with news that the mayor wanted to schedule a formal meeting about the mill expansion. Adrian agreed to come to the village hall the following week. The messenger, a boy of perhaps 12, stared openly at Korik with a mixture of fascination and nervousness. Is it true you can lift a grain sack with one hand? The boy asked. Korik grinned, his small tusks showing. Only the small ones, he said. The big ones need 2 hands, same as anyone. But you are stronger than humans, right? Because you are an orc. I am stronger than some humans and weaker than others, Korik said patiently. Just like some humans are stronger than other humans, it is not magic. It is just how bodies work. The boy considered this seriously, then nodded and ran off with his message delivered. Adrian watched the exchange with quiet pride. Korik handled such questions with grace, never defensive or boastful. He was confident in who he was, orc and human raised both, and he wore that dual heritage with ease. That confidence had not come easy. Adrian remembered the first time Korik had been called a name in the village, the hurt and confusion in his young face. He remembered sitting the boy down and explaining that some people were afraid of what they did not understand, and that the best response was to live well and prove them wrong through action. Korik had taken that lesson to heart. So had Ivara. They had grown up knowing both kindness and prejudice, and they had chosen to be kind themselves. That evening, as the family gathered for supper, Ivara made an announcement. "Thomas asked me to marry him," she said, her cheeks flushed. "Yesterday, after the celebration." There was a moment of silence, then Zara squealed and launched herself at her sister. Paxson whooped, Korik grinned and thumped the table in approval. Adrian and Greta exchanged glances, then both smiled. "What did you say?" Greta asked. "I said yes," Ivara said, her smile radiant. "Of course I said yes. Thomas is a good man," Adrian said. "He will treat you well." "He had better," Korik said with mock severity, "or he will answer to me." They spent the rest of the meal discussing wedding plans and timelines. Ivara wanted to wait until spring, to be married when the valley was green and beautiful. Thomas's family would need time to prepare as well, and there were traditions to be honored on both sides. Adrian watched his daughter's joy and felt the sweet pang of watching a child grow up and away. But he was not losing her. He was gaining a son, and Ivara would still be part of their lives, just in a new configuration. That night, lying in bed with Greta, Adrian voiced a thought that had been nagging at him. "You think it will be hard for her, being married to a human when she is orc?" Greta was quiet for a moment. "Probably," she said honestly. "People will talk, some will judge, but Ivara is strong. She has been dealing with such things her whole life, and Thomas loves her. That will matter more than anything else." "Like it mattered for us," Adrian said. "Exactly like it mattered for us," Greta agreed. She rolled over to face him. "We showed them it could work. We gave them an example. Now they get to write their own story. I hope it is a happy one." "It will be," Greta said with certainty. "They are choosing each other with open eyes. That is the best foundation anyone can have." Adrian pulled her close, breathing in the familiar scent of her hair. "I love you," he said. "I love you too," Greta murmured. "Now go to sleep. Tomorrow is another long day." The weeks flowed into months. Autumn gave way to winter, and winter to spring. The mill expansion moved forward, and Adrian hired the young orc man to help Korik with the grinding work. His name was Durak, and he was quiet and diligent and grateful for the opportunity. Ivara's wedding took place on a bright May morning. The ceremony was held at the mill, under the old oak tree, with friends and family gathered from both the human and orc communities. Thomas stood tall and nervous in his best clothes, and Ivara was beautiful in a dress that Greta had helped her make, green to honor her heritage and white for the human tradition. Adrian walked her to Thomas's side and placed her hand in the younger man's. "Be good to each other," he said quietly. "That is all that matters." Thomas nodded seriously. "I will, sir. I promise." Adrian stepped back and the ceremony proceeded. When Thomas and Ivara exchanged vows, there were tears on both sides, happy tears, the kind that came from witnessing something right and true. The celebration afterward was joyful and lasted well into the night. Adrian danced with Greta, with each of his daughters, and even with the mayor, who had had enough wine to be cheerful and sentimental. "You have done well, Merrick," she told him as they swayed to the music. "Your family is a credit to the valley." "Thank you," Adrian said. "I mean it," Beatrice insisted. "When you first came back with those orc children, I thought it would end in disaster. I am glad to have been wrong." "So am I," Adrian said with feeling. As the party wound down and guests began to leave, Adrian found himself once again standing by the water wheel with Greta at his side. It had become their place, the spot where they processed the big moments of life. "She will be happy," Greta said, watching Avara and Thomas laugh together across the yard. "I know," Adrian said. "We did well with her, with all of them." "We did," Adrian agreed, "though I think they did most of the work themselves." Greta laughed softly. "That is the secret of parenting. Give them roots and wings, then step back and let them fly." Wise words. "I have had good teachers," Greta said, leaning against him. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the celebration, watching their family. Korik was teaching some of the younger village children a dance from his orc heritage, his movements sure and proud. Paxson was deep in conversation with Thorgrim about something that involved animated hand gestures. Zara had fallen asleep under a table, exhausted from excitement. This was what peace looked like, Adrian thought. Not the absence of conflict, but the presence of love and community and people choosing to see the best in each other. The water wheel turned, patient and eternal. The mill stood solid against the night sky. And Adrian Merrick, former soldier and current farmer, husband and father and builder of bridges, felt the deep satisfaction of a life well lived. Years continued their steady march. Korik met and courted a human girl from the next valley, a carpenter's daughter with clever hands and a quick smile. They married in a quiet ceremony and built a house near the mill, close enough to help with the business but far enough to have their own space. Paxson showed no interest in marriage yet, but threw himself into learning everything he could about milling technology. He corresponded with millers across the region, always seeking improvements and innovations. The mill became known for its efficiency and quality, and people came from increasingly distant places to do business there. Zara, when she turned 16, announced that she wanted to be a teacher. She apprenticed with the village schoolmaster and proved to have a gift for making difficult concepts clear. Within a few years, she was running her own small school, teaching both human and orc children with equal dedication. More children came to Adrian and Greta, a son named Maddox who had his father's quiet temperament and his mother's sharp intelligence. Each child was a gift. Each one grew strong and capable and kind. The family expanded in other ways too. Ivara had children, making Adrian and Greta grandparents. The first grandchild was a boy with his mother's green skin and his father's dark hair, a beautiful blend of both heritages. They named him Samuel, and Adrian held him with the same careful wonder he had felt holding his own children. Thorgrim continued to visit, growing older but never losing his vigor. He taught the younger generations about orc culture and history, ensuring that the children understood all parts of their heritage. He became Uncle Thorgrim to everyone, blood relation or not. The mill prospered. The farm produced good harvests year after year. The family tree grew more complex and beautiful with each passing season. On Adrian's 50th birthday, the family threw him a celebration. He protested that such fuss was unnecessary, but Greta overruled him with the easy authority of a woman who had been managing him for decades. They gathered in the mill yard, 3 generations now, along with friends and neighbors and business associates. There were speeches and toasts and far too much food. Adrian bore it all with patient good humor, secretly pleased by the attention even if he would never admit it. When called upon to speak, he stood slowly, his joints a bit stiffer than they once were, but his mind still sharp. "I am not good with words," he began, and the gathered crowd laughed because they had heard him say this 100 times. "But I know what matters: family, community, work that means something, love that lasts." He looked around at the faces watching him, his wife, his children and grandchildren, his friends. "I came home from war with nothing," he said, "and I found everything, not because I deserved it, but because I was given grace, because people chose kindness over fear. Because love, it turns out, is stronger than the things that try to divide us." His voice grew rough with emotion. "Thank you for sharing this life with me. Thank you for making an old soldier into something better. Thank you for being my family." The applause was thunderous. Greta came to stand beside him, and he wrapped his arm around her waist. They had walked this road together for so long now that he could hardly remember a time when she was not beside him. That night, after the guests had gone and the cleaning was done, Adrian and Greta walked to the water wheel one last time. The night was clear and cool, stars blazing overhead. 50 years, Adrian said wonderingly. Half a century. Only 30 of them with me, Greta pointed out. The first 20 do not count, Adrian laughed. The first 20 were just preparation for finding you. Sweet talker, Greta said, but she was smiling. They stood in their familiar spot, listening to the water and the turning wheel. So much had changed since that rain-soaked day when Adrian had come home to ruins. But some things remained constant: the flow of water, the turning of seasons, the strength of love properly tended. "You remember what Thorgrim asked me, that day he came to claim the children?" Greta said suddenly. "He asked many things. He asked what kind of life you could give us," Greta said. "A human farmer, he called you. What kind of life is that?" "I remember," Adrian said quietly. "This is the kind of life," Greta said, gesturing to the mill, the house, the land beyond. "This is the life you gave us: safety, love, purpose, belonging, a place in the world where we do not have to hide what we are or apologize for existing." She turned to face him fully. "You gave us everything, Adrian, everything that matters." Adrian cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs tracing the familiar contours of her cheeks. She was older now, as was he. Gray threaded through her dark hair. Lines marked her face, each one earned through years of laughter and worry and life fully lived. She was more beautiful to him than ever. "I love you," he said simply. "I know," Greta said, her eyes shining. "I have always known." They kissed there under the stars, beside the water wheel that had turned through all their years together. When they parted, they were both smiling. "Come to bed, husband," Greta said. "The work will still be there tomorrow." "It always is," Adrian agreed. They walked back to the house hand in hand, their steps matched from long practice. Inside, the fire had burned low in the hearth. They banked it properly and climbed the stairs to their room, the home they had built together over decades of partnership. As Adrian drifted toward sleep, Greta curled against his side. He thought about the path that had brought them here, about the war that had broken him and the family that had healed him, about the choice to build instead of destroy, to love instead of fear. He thought about the water wheel turning, patient and eternal, and about the grain that would be ground tomorrow, and the day after and the day after that. About the work that gave life meaning and the love that made it worthwhile. He thought about his children and grandchildren, carrying forward the lessons he and Greta had tried to teach, about bridges built between communities that had been enemies, about a world slowly learning that differences could be strengths instead of divides. Most of all, he thought about the woman sleeping beside him, the orc mother who had become his bride at last, who had given him everything worth having and asked for nothing but his presence and his love. He had come home from war to ruins, and built a paradise from the rubble. Not alone, never alone, but with Greta and the family they had made together. The water wheel turned in the darkness outside, and Adrian Merrick fell asleep in the home he had built with his own hands, surrounded by the people he loved more than life itself, at peace with the world and with himself. The story of the soldier who came home to find a family in the ruins was complete. But the life they built together continued, day by day, season by season, the wheel turning steady and true, grinding grain into flour, transforming what was broken into something sustaining and good. That was the miracle, Adrian thought in his last moment of wakefulness. Not that love had found them, but that they had built something lasting from it, something real, something worth every hard choice and every sacrifice. The mill stood solid in the night. The family slept safe under its roof. The water wheel turned, and in the morning the work would begin again, as it always did, as it always would, for as long as love and purpose and steady hands remained to guide it.